Hi everyone, welcome to Grey's Anatomy, episode 2. Today we are going to jump right in and cover some basics. First, let's talk about some anatomical regions and basic terminology that you'll be using in this class and probably from here on out if you're going into the medical field. Each region of the body has an anatomical term that will help you so much in the future if you get them down now. So let's start with an example. Can you point to your axilla region? Well, did you point to your armpit? If so, way to go, and if not, don't worry, but I would definitely practice them as much as you can just to get them down because it will help you out in the future to know. So I'm sure you're wondering how in the heck is this going to really help me? So let me give you an example. Let's go back to what we just learned, the axilla region, and can you make an educated guess about where the axillary artery goes or where it runs through now that you know what the axilla region is? Yeah, I'm sure you can. Runs right through here, right through the armpit region that we now know is called the axilla. That will come up many times in the future, and it's so helpful to have that little bit of a clue of where you're looking, whether it's in the cadaver, in a textbook, or just to have that mental picture in your head. The next thing that we need to cover are terms of movement. Some of them are going to be pretty self-explanatory, so we're not going to go over those. Things such as flexion, extension, rotation, elevation, depression. You get the point. We're going to go ahead and skip those and jump into some of the terms that you may not have heard before entering this course, and I'm going to provide you with the tips and tricks that I used when I was in it. The biggest tip that I want you to remember is that all of these terms, whenever they're being used, are referring to the movement happening out of or from anatomical position. So if you don't know, anatomical position is whenever the head is level, eyes looking forward, feet flat on the ground, and your thumbs facing outwards, so your palms are facing the observer. The first two terms that we're going to talk about are supination and pronation. We're going to talk about them as a pair because they are opposites. You'll see. Supination is whenever you rotate your forearm in an effort to make the palm of your hand face anteriorly, and pronation is whenever you rotate your forearm in an effort to make the palm of your hand face posteriorly. And I know what you're thinking. How in the heck am I supposed to remember that? No need to stress. I have two methods, one for each, that may or may not help you remember. So for supination, as we said, rotation of the forearm in an effort to make the palms face forward. So whenever I think of supination, I think of the first part of the word soup because I like food and soup is a good food. So think of that whenever you hear supination. Make a cup with your hands and say, "Give me soup." That is supination. So palms are up or facing anteriorly if you're in anatomical position, supination. Pronation, first word that I hear is pro. I'm a pro, don't worry. Okay, so supination, you're making cups with your hands to get soup. Pronation, you don't need the soup, you're a pro. You don't need it. So even if you got soup, you're sweeping it away because you do not need it. You're too cool for the soup. So supination, pronation. Next, I want to cover plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. Again, these are opposites in a way, and I think that they go well whenever you pair them together. This one is pretty simple, but I still needed a way to remember them because I don't know why I always got them switched up at first. So plantar flexion is pointing the toes downwards. You can either remember that plantar point, okay, they both start with a P, or you could think of it as plantar, plant your foot in the ground. Either one, as long as you know that plantar flexion is the action of moving your toes downward, so pointing your foot. Dorsiflexion is the exact opposite, bringing your feet upward or flexing your foot. So I remember that one because dorsal is the back side of our body, and you're trying to bring your toes up, moving them backwards, like to the back of your body. So I hope that this helps. I know that one's a little but it helped me as long as you remember plantar flexion, and then dorsiflexion is the exact opposite. The last term that I want to hit on is eversion versus inversion. So how I remember inversion and eversion is just the fact that inversion is whenever you're trying to get the inner portion of your foot, inversion, inner portion, off of the ground. So your feet start like this, and you're simply going to go whoop onto the edges of your feet or the lateral side of your foot. So that would be inversion versus eversion is the exact opposite. You're just going to roll onto the medial portion of your foot and have your lateral portion up. So as long as you remember that inversion is getting the insides off the ground, remember that eversion is the exact opposite. Alrighty, time to kick it up a notch. Let's add which anatomical plane each of these movements are occurring in. There are three main planes that we're going to talk about in anatomy. The first one is sagittal, which is cutting the body into right and left half. The second is horizontal, cutting the body into a superior and inferior half. And the last is coronal, which is cutting the body into a anterior and posterior half. When referring to movement, we're going to use the sagittal and coronal plane for now. So let's go ahead and find some tricks and tips that will help us remember what the heck those are. Alrighty, so to remember the sagittal plane, we're going to bring out our lovely satchel, or whatever you call this, but for this purpose, it's a satchel, because it sounds like sagittal and it works. And you're going to put it on. And you'll notice that now it's cutting me into a right and a left half. Wherever the strap is, I just pretend that that is just going to slide straight through me, and that's how I remember the sagittal plane. And for coronal plane, we're going to get a little more fun. So for coronal plane, I don't know why, but the first thing that came to mind was Corona. I don't know. Don't ask. I don't drink. What is alcohol? Picture all those crazy people in the world that drink alcohol and just pretend like you know what's going on whenever they get that Corona in their hand, or their 6th or 12th, and they chug it. So, movies and such taught me that they start to dance, maybe. No personal experience there. So, your coronal plane is your dancing plane. This is the best dance moves that you've got, apparently, okay? So just go with it. So I think of something coming out this way. Coronal plane is any action, pretty much, going this way. We have an exception. We'll get to that later. But any movement going this way is in your coronal plane. So anything that is going to slice you, kind of, if I was from the side, it would slice me to an anterior and a posterior portion. The thumb does exactly opposite of what you think it should be doing. Or not what it should be doing, but what plane it should be happening in. Let's compare it to our arm. So if I get my arm and I abduct it or take it away from my body, my thumb, that means that abduction for my thumb is going to happen in my sagittal plane. Because right now for my arm, it's happening in my coronal plane. And the thumb does exactly what you don't want it to do by going the opposite way. So thumb abduction is actually coming forward like this. So same with flexion. So flexion of my arm, I'm going to raise it up this way. So flexion of my thumb is going to be in the opposite direction because flexion of my arm is in the sagittal plane. Flexion of my thumb will be in the coronal plane. I know it sucks, but it's there, so we gotta learn it. The last one that I want to hit on is mainly adduction. I don't really have a way to remember abduction, except for the fact that it's the opposite of adduction. So how I remember that one is just the fact that it has ADD as the first 3 letters. So adduction is whenever your arm is out like this, and you're adding it back to your body. So that's how I remember that one. Alrighty, so let's practice. Use those terms that we learned a little while ago or that you may already know, and use those anatomical planes and tell me what is going on in each movement that I do right about now. Be sure to check the description to see if you got the answers right to those few movements and what plane that they were happening in. I hope that this video helped you get a few of those basics under your belt because it will help you so much later on in this course and in your field of medicine. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to comment below with anything that I confuse you more on so I can fix that, or any topics that you want me to cover, or just anything in the anatomy world that you're like, I need help, this is awful, because I promise I'll try to make a video that will make it a little bit better for you, because that's what I'm here for, and I can't do it without your input, so I can know what to make next. So please, please, please comment below, subscribe if you want to get notifications for when my next video comes out, and I will see you in the next one.